the Binance podcast. My name is Jared Winn, and I'm your host. Today, I'm the Senior Vice President of Charity with Binance, and I'm very excited to share this episode with you. Today, I have with us Bruce Fenton, CEO of Atlantic Financial, to learn more about his experiences and his thoughts on the impacts of COVID-19 on the world and the changing macro economy. So, Bruce, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Bruce, I'd love to hear just a little bit more about you first and your experience with crypto and what brought you into the space and how you're here today.
Sure. My journey in crypto, I guess, probably began when I was 7 years old or so. My mom was a stockbroker at a major brokerage firm and a financial advisor. So as a real little kid, I was kind of raised in the brokerage firm. I came home every day after school. Like every day, not a couple days a week, but every day came home, not home. I came to the brokerage firm right from school and I would play on the floor. And eventually I started trading stocks and playing with the pink sheets and things like that. So by the time I was 9 or so, I was trading stocks in my mom's office. And then I got a job there very, very young at age 14. I got my first job at Dean Witter, and I became a fully licensed stockbroker by the time I was 19. And so I just did that for forever, really, in some form or another. I was registered for many, many years. I'm registered again now. And then I had a registered investment advisory group. I founded Atlantic Financial in 1994, which was one of the first full service investment firms on the internet. So we saw the internet grow, and we invested in the growth of the internet, in all of the dot-com growth. And that gave me a lot of experience understanding, bubbles and busts and technology adoption and these kind of things. We were quite lucky in those days, and that, paved the way for crypto. I was always interested in emerging markets and emerging technology. That was sort of the tagline of the firm, that we help people understand change and emerging markets and emerging technology. So when crypto came along, or at least when it came along for me, I got into it a couple of years after it had come along, but around 2012 or so, I started getting interested in crypto, and then I moved pretty much full-time focus by 2013. And the rest is history. I've been pretty early in the space, and because of the things that I've done, especially focusing on a couple investments and especially our event that we host, the Roundtable, I've been fortunate enough to be at the very, very front line, had a really great front row seat for the last 7 years with this crazy change that we've seen. And I've gotten to meet just about everybody in the space and work with a lot of interesting people. So it's been quite a fun journey and really exciting and interesting for sure.
That's fantastic, Bruce. And you mentioned a couple of things in that are really intriguing to me. For one, I love that your mother was a stockbroker. I think that's fantastic. And there's nothing more than following in mom's footsteps versus dad's footsteps in this case. And when were you at Dean Witter? I'm curious.
I was there. Well, I started my first job. I was 14 years old. And then I was registered there as a broker when I was 19. I actually got fully licensed by the time I was 19 years old. So quite young and very unusual, just as it is now. Typically the new hires at these firms are, MBAs, 20, late 20s usually, or mid 30. I think the average is 35 or something when I did it. So I was pretty young, but I had been in that environment already for 5 years as a teenager, running, as an assistant. And the regulations weren't quite so strict back then about what unregistered people were allowed to do. I was actually, when I first started, I was allowed to actually call and solicit investments and things like that. You didn't need a license for that when I first started doing it. And then, then you needed a license. I got the license. And so, yeah, that was a great experience. And I learned a lot from my mom. She actually came back and worked for our firm later after I founded Atlantic Financial. She had retired and she came and worked for me. And we talk all the time still. And she's very interested in the changes in this industry and how things are going. So I did learn a lot from her and her colleagues really, really early on, very, very, very young. I was following stocks and it became kind of second nature, to the point that I actually, don't really realize some of the things that I know just because I learned them so young. I just feel like everybody knows these things, but I did really have a good advantage with some of the investing tips that I learned. And I'd go to all her conferences. I'd sit in on her meetings. So I had a pretty good head start by the time I was fully registered. And that enabled me to do really well with my career. Once I had my license, within 2 years, I was a vice president. So I was like a 20-year-old vice president. And then Dean Witter bought Morgan Stanley. And then I went and founded my own firm. So it was, really exciting, really fun. And that's always my roots. Just recently, I actually got my license back again. I hadn't needed it for several years because I was doing more, big picture consulting over in the Middle East for giant wealth funds and things like that. And you don't need your investment license. But I got it again. And, that's really my roots, just being a financial advisor and investor. Nobody uses the word stockbroker anymore, but I kind of like that. I've called myself stockbroker once I got my license back because I think it's kind of cool. I don't know anybody who uses that term anymore, but I think it should be. I think that, buying and selling stocks is really important. It's a core of capital formation. It's a core of the global economy. And I want to see more of it. And I want to see more people buying stocks and more companies working with equities and securities and these kind of things.
It is. So it's fascinating exactly how much that landscape has changed and how the need for a quote unquote stockbroker has changed from calling your friend to being able to now go online and do that stock transaction yourself. So the stockbroker element has changed so much. And when you talk about working at Dean Witter, actually, Jay Twizzle was a client of mine back in the day. And I'm visualizing the Chris Gardner climb to fame that you must have gone through, right? The whole ladder.
Yeah, that movie is great because The Pursuit of Happiness, because they did a great job on the set. It's exactly it's the same years when I started and a couple of years before. So it really very similar in a lot of ways. Me going to work with my mom, and then the computers all look the same and everything. I mean, might even be the same offices. I went down to New York occasionally with her. So yeah, it is interesting. It's changed a lot, some for the better. There's a lot of makes it easier for technology. When I first started, even getting quotes was a big deal. Like, how would you know what Microsoft was worth? You'd have to wait for the newspaper to come out, or you had to call a broker. There was no internet.
A lot has changed now. I've gone into the situation and seeing all these changes with technology. My children, for example, for the first time, they're 7 and 9 and second and third grade respectively, and they're doing Zoom sessions with their teachers, something that I don't think that we would have seen for years and years. And it's as a result of this friction caused by the pandemic. So I'm really curious to hear some of your insights as we continue this conversation as to how some of these changes in just the general engagement between somebody's financial investments and as well with the up and coming blockchain technologies, what might we see out of this? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start at day one, as you've had some very interesting insights with regards to your opinion of COVID-19. And you were one of the earlier mentioners of COVID-19. I feel that, you had some good opinions of it before it even became more widespread. How did you first hear about this virus, and what was your initial interpretation of it? Did you feel that this was something to be afraid of, or did you know that it was going to get to the scale that we see today?
I was quite worried pretty early on, and I did sound the alarm, much earlier than most people. I was right there with Balaji and some of the other ones, in the late January, early February, certainly throughout February. The U.S. didn't really pick up on this until March, kind of mid-March, even and late March, and I'm good at watching trends and change. Like I said, understanding the way the world changes and technology. And I think I've been around a lot. I've lived all over the world and met a lot of people and just done a lot of things. And that helps contribute to having good understanding of how the world works. And that helps predict trends and predict what's going on. So my first warning signs were obviously from China and Wuhan. And watching I have a lot of Chinese friends. I work with a lot of people from China. So I'm on WeChat, and I was seeing scary videos and drama and this kind of thing. That was the first concern. When I saw how the impact of the supply chain, I said, wow, that's a big deal, because I understood the supply, anybody in China understands the supply chain, and anybody else anywhere in the world who has manufacturing understands it. And I have a lot of friends that understand manufacturing, and they were telling me right away that, boy, you're going to have problems with electronics and things like that. So that was my first concern. And then looking at the severity of the virus and whether it could be contained or not, there was hope that China could contain it originally. back when it was just a few thousand cases. And then obviously we all know what happened. It kept growing. And, I had a lot of red flags that I was watching for. I said, boy, if it gets out of China, that's a problem. If it gets into Europe, that's a problem. If we see uncontained outbreaks in 10 cities in Europe, that's a problem. We see it in the US. We see, 15 cases, and then all of a sudden you see 100 cases in 10 different places. Those were my red flags, because I knew once we had uncontained outbreak in the US, and I told my wife, I actually canceled my family vacation. And I told my wife, I said, and she went with the kids. I stayed home and did prepping because I was very worried about this, but it was just a driving vacation. It was local. And I was even worried about that. But I said, if we start to, this was before any cases were in the US, there was 0 cases other than those 15 contained cases. But I said, if we start to see, hey, there's 9 cases in Washington, DC, and there's, 11 cases in Seattle, that's a real red flag for me. So as soon as that happened, I went into overdrive. I'm a very cautious person. I'm very, very cautious. And I don't like risk. It's part of my career as an investment advisor, avoiding risk. Yep. So I say, when you have a huge, and at the time we didn't know what the CFR was. I mean, it could have been 10% or something. I mean, we knew this tragedy in Italy where for whatever reason they had a much higher, and I think it was legit numbers. I think they legit did really have a lot more death than elsewhere. But anyway, those were the big red flags. And I said, we don't know how bad this is going to be. Let's really, lock down. So I went in pretty early, went into quarantine, and I've been doing that myself. Now, having said that, it's important to say also with that, I sort of regret a little bit of that early caution, because I'm not a fan of the way that most of these governments globally have reacted. I think that this stuff should be done voluntarily. There's so many issues when you go into mandating that people must do this. There's a lot of unforeseen consequences. You have a lot of other drawbacks for that. I'd much rather see it voluntarily. So I sort of regret being early, because I was sounding the alarm like crazy. I was saying, stay in. It could be dangerous. It could be bad. We didn't even know if it seems that kids are relatively immune. We didn't know that at the time. I was like, I took my kids out of school right away. And I don't regret that. But what I do regret is that any piece of any alarm that I caused contributed to what I think is now panic. And you have panic where you have, these government bureaucrats who said, it's about 2-3 weeks after I was sounding the alarm saying, hey, go to Costco, get some supplies. This could be a problem. And 3 weeks later, I see, you're not allowed to walk outside in Italy. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean you're not allowed to walk outside? That, and then Cuomo came on and said, we think it might be 9 months. And immediately he lost me. I said, nope. Forget it. 9 months. It's preposterous. Yeah. You can't do it. It doesn't matter what the CFR is. You can't do 9 months. And it shouldn't be mandatory anyway. If it was super, I've had a lot of people say, well, wouldn't you be for the mandatory lockdowns if it was really deadly? No, because if it was super deadly, I mean, if it had a 20% CFR, nobody would go out. You don't need the lockdowns. Everybody'd stay in voluntarily. You really need to in my opinion, let people make their own decisions based on their own risk and their own risk tolerance. Mine is low. I may not leave here for another couple months. I haven't left my house once in like 70 days. That's my business. My fear shouldn't force you to stay inside. I got a couple college kids who work for me. They're 19, 20 years old, and they're super in shape, and they're broke. Who am I to tell them they can't work? They can work if they want. They're very low risk. Even if they get it, they're pretty low risk, and that's their business if they want to do it. Just like it's their business if they want to do drugs or have unprotected sex or do anything else that's risky. That's their business. There's any number of things that could kill you. People do all kinds of, free clamming and all kinds of other stupid hobbies and stuff. That's their business. My fear shouldn't make somebody else lose their freedoms.
And you actually made mention of quite a few things in which there's oftentimes, there's methods of control over any type of population. There's fear, there's inspiration, but fear oftentimes is the simplest mechanism of control, and panic is oftentimes as well. When fear gets to that certain point, panic instills, and then of course that's when you get chaos and disordinance. And with that though, I feel that fear is a strong mechanism to get the population to operate in a manner that is desirable for the government. And in this case, in their mind, or at least in their presentation, the general well-being of the entire population. So you mentioned as well a good point as well, in which, and I'm starting to notice a trend with yourself, is in which it seems that you have a close eye on data. And with data, it can be argued that humans operate mathematically. Everything we do, whether that be on a sine wave, or if we're talking about Fibonacci or anything of that, most everything we do can be tied back to binary, right? Now, you started back in stockbrokering back in the times of the earlier stages of the internet. You also got into Bitcoin in its earlier stages. And you also were one of the people who noticed earlier trends when it comes to COVID-19 and how it was growing. How do you stay on top of all of this? So how do you actually receive your information, and what can you share as inspiration to others who want to be on the leading edge of these new up and coming events?
Yeah, that's my superpower, I guess. Those aren't the only ones. I was really early on the internet. Really, I invested in one of the leading voice recognition technologies. You didn't used to be able to call on a phone and tell something in the voice, the computer would recognize you. I invested early in that, and then I moved to Dubai and did a bunch of work in Dubai because I thought Dubai was going to be an economic center back when in 2002, when everybody thought it was crazy. Nobody was doing anything in the Middle East. They were thought of as our enemy because of 9/11. People were like, what are you doing over there? And so I've been really good at trends, and even within crypto, Bitcoin. I was, there day one on Ethereum, and many of these other trends pretty early. So that's the one thing I'm very good at. I'm not good at everything. I'm not great at a lot of things. There's a lot of things that I'm pretty terrible at, but that particular thing is one thing I'm good at. And I think it's just been a lot of practice and a lot of studying and a lot of work going way back to those early days. When I was 14, I was trying to pick what the next stock was, and I was listening to the smart people and trying to figure out what the economy was going to do. And I've had some great mentors. I've been fortunate enough to work directly reporting to 3 different, super tycoons, deca billionaire type people that are, really sharp. I've had a few of those, 3 of them. And then because of the work with them, all kinds of other circles, I've met everybody, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, met all kinds of interesting people, probably a couple hundred billionaires, and learning from them. And then I watch people who aren't necessarily friends or colleagues, but I've met them a few times, people like Jim Rogers, other people who write and things like that. And I try and Ray Dalio, I don't know Ray Dalio, but I read his books, these kind of things. So I seek out those kind of people who have been, Jim Rogers has been very good at predicting the future. I interviewed him a couple times, maybe 15 years ago, and then 5 years ago, and then, 10 years ago, whatever. And so I tried to seek out, I became a broker so early. I went to college later. So I went before, at 19, I hadn't even gone to college. And that was actually an advantage because I didn't think I knew everything. Sometimes you get people where they come out of Harvard with an economics degree and they think they know everything, even though they're pretty new in the business. But because I was so young and didn't have any education really, like I say, I went to college later. I just trusted. I would just spend my time, instead of trying to figure out why I was right, I'd figure out who was right. It's a lot easier to find a genius than try to become a genius. So I would just figure out whether it was our own internal analysts at Morgan Stanley, or whether it was somebody, Peter Lynch at Fidelity or whatever. I would seek out these people, Jim Rogers, Soros, Lynch, and I'd listen to every single thing they say, read their books, that kind of stuff. So that helped. And then over time, I had a lot of experience just, there's this sort of concept of understanding how the world works. I've heard that phrase used a few times, how the world works. And it sounds simple, but it really takes a lot of time. I think it takes 20 years of a professional life to really get it. And you have to be, in my case, I was lucky. I've been in these rooms with these billionaires and world leaders, seeing how decisions are made and how things happen. So I can tell when the news says, oh, we think we're speculating on, they wouldn't do that. I can know what might work. And so something like when something new comes along, when I see the construction in Dubai and I see the money flowing around, I'm like, wow, this is for real. It makes a lot of sense. It's equidistant from from Europe and Asia, and it's got Africa close by. It's a center in the Middle East. It's exciting. Women are allowed to drive. This is going to be a big thing. Same with the supply chain. These supply chain issues come along. Because of my exposure to the world, I say, something that most people wouldn't say, which is I knew the impact of supply chains. I said, wow, this is a real big deal. And that got me hyper focused on it. And that's the other thing I tend to do with these situations, just like Bitcoin. A lot of people go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. I follow smart people, try and understand how the world works, and then become hyper focused on something. So with Bitcoin, like many people, when I first got into it real seriously, especially 2013, I was just totally obsessed. I went to every single conference. There was only like one or two a month, but I went to all of them and talked to everybody and read everything I could. I read everything on Reddit, and there wasn't nearly as much content back then. There was no podcast, there was no shows like yours. So you could kind of consume all the content about Bitcoin in early 2013. You could do that in, probably a couple months. Some of the technical stuff might take longer, but you certainly wouldn't master it. But that's the other thing, hyper focus. And I got very hyper focused on COVID, real early. I was looking at, what this means and how do we evaluate. And the other thing is, I think that fits into that, that comes with a lot of experience, is understanding what's true. And this is something I've just realized kind of recently, that one of the things that I have as a good competency is having a BS detector. I was a salesperson, an advisor. I've seen and then being in crypto 7 years, I've seen, and I worked for one of the richest people in the world. So I was pitched 100 times a day. I had people coming up 100, and these are not, amateur pitchers. These are like, some of them are billionaires. They're hedge fund managers and stuff. Everybody, when you're working for somebody like that, everybody wants. So I've heard every variation of pitch. I've seen every variation of scammer and media and manipulator and politician. And in crypto, I've kind of seen it all. So I have a really good BS detector and a really good navigator on figuring out what's true. And that was one interesting thing about COVID. Early on, I figured out that the risk was high, but it was a big question mark. And I said, you have a question mark risk. And then once it got kind of politicized, it became much harder to figure out what was true, because people started not having a motivation to tell the truth, but they wanted to make their state look good or their country look good, or suppress this data or increase that data. And now you have people, I haven't followed, you don't need to be as immersed right now that the story is unfolding. But, over the last month or so, it's, I don't know what's true on COVID. I don't really trust any of them. I certainly don't trust any of these official sources. But those are some of the ingredients, I think, having hyper focus, figuring out what's true, having a really good BS detector. Those are things I advise to people. And you can duplicate any of those kind of things. There's books about how to figure out if people are lying, and how to find truth and seek out truth, and these kind of things. And those have really helped me a lot, and in picking out what the next trends are going to be.
You've mentioned so many points there that I actually completely agree with. And in specific, as technology grows, I feel that the civilization is becoming smarter. And as such, scams are becoming more and more clever. And you talked about basically this opinion of following the leader. And that's how actually a lot of these adopters, and we've come into this era of influence. We have influencer marketing and these persons that people trust because of their track record and their reputation. A lot of people invested in Bitcoin as a result of Zuckerberg and the Winklevosses actually, saying that this is a technology worth investing. And people trust that based on their track record. And we're now at a position where nobody can put a hat on and say, I'm a billionaire, you should trust me, this is what we're doing, we're going to make millions, follow me. Because there's so many people that have been burned at this point. And technology really advances us in many ways, but also advances corruption in a lot of ways. So we've gotten now to the stage or the situation where people are pessimistic and naturally or intrinsically curious and want to know, like, okay, what is this information? Why is it being presented to me? And what is the motivation behind putting this out there? Is this in genuine intent of informing the public, or is this in a situation where they're trying to motivate us to behave in a certain way as a result of this. You know, we go back to the days of the Roman Empire where the Bible was read in Latin to motivate the public to act and behave in certain ways that were otherwise advantageous to law enforcement. You know, today it's, you know, we could see some laterals with this, but what I'm really interested in is how do we develop from this? Because right now, anybody can give advice. Anybody could say, this is what I recommend. And their clout is based on, you know, how many people can actually, for one, their track record of how accurate have they been. For two, how many people follow them and actually agree with what they're saying. But now with blockchain, I feel that there's a level of integrity that can really be applied. There are ways that blockchain can keep people honest. And what you were talking about previously is, you know, politicians basically operating on their own agenda. Why are they saying the things that they are saying? Is there incentive or is there motive behind that? Or is it there actually validity behind what it is that they're saying? And with blockchain, you know, there's no question as to whether or not something operates in one way, one direction or another. It's very mathematical. It's all in code. So we remove that human equation. And I've spoken before how I feel that humans are probably the only random variable on this planet. In fact, I actually read to generate a random number is near impossible. You can use wind speeds, you can use solar flares, you can do all of these things that you would think are random to try to create this random number, but realistically, everything happens on a mathematical spectrum. Humans, however, we can have an idea as to how humans will behave. We follow a similar trend, but there's situations where we can't predict if a human is going to be honest or dishonest. And I feel that blockchain is really a solution for this. And we utilize that at Binance Charity. Our goal is to really promote the transparency and philanthropy, to show people the journey of their donation. Your donation came here, went all the way here, and we have blockchain now to prove that. Many people, I don't think, will actually follow the blockchain ledger to see that it actually happened. As to this date, most people have just trusted organizations. When they donate $1 million, they trust the Red Cross or whomever else that $1 million went where it should have gone. Now, with blockchain, how do you see ways that blockchain can keep people honest and otherwise create an environment where things that are being shared and things that are being said are actually true? And there's no question as to whether or not this is true data. It's real in itself. And this might be, we've talked about this with voting. We've talked about this with COVID-19 infections. What are your thoughts on the ways that the crypto community or the blockchain community can really, at this point, create solutions to overcome some of these issues that we're encountering?
Well, there's two that come to mind right off the bat that you sort of touched on, which is one is the social and the other is the technical. The social part of it is our community has been very good at seeking out truth because there is so much BS. There's a lot of scams. There's a lot of, you know, incredible claims. There's all kinds of, it's a very tough industry. So the good thing about that is, you know, boy, you don't want to lie to somebody in this business. I mean, you know, it's like an army of investigators and lawyers. You know, I've seen people in the Bitcoin blockchain space, you know, they can run circles around lawyers or even judges or anybody else because, you know, their analytical and logical capabilities are quite high. You know, and that's raised my bar. You know, boy, am I careful when I say some tweet, you know, like just something inconsequential, because you don't want to have anything that somebody's going to attack, and you do enough of it and you're exposed enough in this space. You know, everybody's made a mistake on a PowerPoint. Everybody's made a tweet with a, you know, slightly factually incorrect thing. And boy, you don't do that much in this community. They'll rip you apart. And the right thing to do is you fix it. You apologize. Oh, yep. Hey, my bad. That slide was wrong. Let me fix it. And then it's cool. But if you go in there and say, oh, no, it's not, you can ruin your whole career in this space. It's very, very, very tough. And yes, we take things very logically and literally, and we look at the you know, I'm arguing like a zoning thing with over a real estate thing, and you know, I look very carefully at the rules, and that's partly because of coming from this industry where it's like you're dealing with the SEC and all these other things. You look very carefully and say, does it say you can do this or that? And if it doesn't, you know, I think that we can push the limit on that. So that cultural change is good. And I think it's harsh and it's hard, and it sort of reflects a tough world that we're in. But guess what? The whole world is tough now, and tougher due to the crisis. So those are good skills to have. The reverse of that is, you trust government or somebody to say, well, oh, it's regulated, I don't have to worry. And that never works. It's better if people have more responsibility, the kind of on the toes skepticism and paranoia that your typical crypto person has, whether it's in who they trust, who they talk to, how they email, what email they use, how they do two-factor, all of those things. Those are healthy. I mean, it's healthy to be careful and even a little paranoid, and you can be friendly, but because I have such a high BS detector, I know a whole bunch of people that are lying to me all the time, and I just kind of smile and I'm, great. I'm polite to them, and I never do a deal with them. But having that kind of healthy, I can still be nice to people even though if I know they're lying. And I'm so good at catching it that I know so many are lying. I don't really even, if I didn't ever talk to any of the liars, it would be like half the people. I just don't do business deals with them.
Just keep the upper hand.
Exactly.
It's that saying, you really can't trap a liar, right?
Exactly.
There's no advantage.
Then the second part of it is the technical part, which is a blockchain can be used to really show in writing in an immutable or semi-immutable ledger, a statement of truth. This is what's true. And to me, that's what a blockchain is. The core of the technology, a blockchain is a ledger, and the ledger says what's true. You have a ledger that says you're permitted to be in the home or apartment that you're in right now. You have a ledger that says you're allowed to drive your car. There's a system, there's probably 10 ledgers we interacted with just to do this interview. I had to have a credential, you had to have a credential. That's all ledgers somewhere in some corporation at Zoom and Binance and everywhere else. Ledgers run the world, and all they are is saying it's a true thing. Yes, Jared is authorized to be in this apartment because he's a tenant there. Yes, Bruce is allowed to drive this car because he has a registration, and there's a ledger somewhere saying that corresponds to my driver's license. And that's all a blockchain is a ledger. What's nice about it is that it's a better ledger because it's pretty much impossible to change, very, 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 very difficult to change, and nobody's in control of it. In the case of Bitcoin, it's a distributed and decentralized ledger. So it's a very, very powerful statement of truth, and that's all it is. At the core of it is a statement of truth. So if we combined kind of the social aspects of being skeptical and all of that, along with the technical aspects to say, what is really true? And you can combine the two too. You can now take, there's people who take news headlines and things like that, and they'll put them on the blockchain so that, at least even if it gets scraped from Google because of censors or banned from Twitter, it's still going to be on the blockchain.
Yes. And, you mentioned a couple of things on there. One thing I'll say is the crypto community specifically is very smart. I've always said that it's a nerd's paradise, finally, in which you have a lot of very intelligent people that have created this essential economy. And at this point, there's going to be a lot of pessimism, especially after 2017, all of the fake profiles, all these scam ICOs. I feel like there's plenty of Sherlock Holmes with their magnifying glasses that are just waiting to prove somebody wrong. I want to touch base as well. We actually last month, or coming into this month now, we brought 200,000 masks into New York. And our goal was to show that these masks are being delivered to hospitals transparently through blockchain. And as such, we launched a PPE token. And this PPE token essentially compensates the couriers that are delivering these masks to different hospitals. And as such, one mask is equal to one PPE token. So when these tokens or when these masks were being delivered, we transferred these tokens to show publicly on the ledger that this had occurred. So this is one thing that we're trying to do at Binance Charity to really show that we can be transparent in giving alone. But as you've mentioned, I think there are much greater ways that we can be transparent. There's no need for us to trust large brands or organizations anymore when there's technology that can replace that and otherwise make us more efficient. The corruption, I feel, will honestly go a bit to the wayside. And you actually recently published something, it was called the end of an epic, a term that I haven't heard back since my Chrono Trigger days, being epic, but that's my gamer reference. Tell me a bit more about that report and how that really ties into what we're experiencing today.
I had a lot of thoughts over from the time of kind of sounding the alarm and worried about supply chains to the point we were at a month ago. You know, a lot happened. I mean, that was one of the most transformative 2-month periods in that anybody's ever seen, modern human history for sure, in the last 100 years. You know, we haven't seen that much change very much at all. It was a big, big, big change. And I had so many thoughts about that. The other thing I do is think a lot. I go on a lot of walks. I go on a walk every day. I meditate and I think a lot. And I just had a lot of ideas going around in my head about what's happening and just trying to piece it all together with the story of, you know, how I think about the world and how I think about investing and what does this mean? And that's why I came up, you know, end of an epoch. It's the end of a true shift in an era. That's what I believe we're going through right now. It's not just, oh, it's shut down and then things go back. It's a total fundamental shift. And these things happen. Every generation, there are shifts. Every 10 years, there's a shift. But every generation, there's a little bit bigger shift. And then every 4 generations or so, historically, there's been a much bigger shift, a fourth turning. And then about every 4 of those, there's kind of an even bigger one, sort of an epoch shift. And I think we're in an epoch shift. We're definitely in a fourth turning. We're definitely in a once in 100 year situation. I'll argue anybody with that. I debate anybody on that. I think for sure it's a once in 100 year, but it really might be a once in 300 year. The kind of thing like when you saw the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, or the creation of America, the French and American revolutions, you know, birth of Christianity, birth of Islam. These are the kind of shifts that I think we're going through right now. A major shift where things change so much that the world is unrecognizable from how it looked before. That's what happened. Even in the fourth turnings, that happens. You know, 100 years ago, that was happening right now. You had people who grew up who'd never seen a car, and then they're fighting in the fields of France in World War I. They got airplanes flying over their head and tanks and jeeps and stuff in a matter of like 5 years. I mean, it would be like us finding ourselves on a battlefield with lasers and, you know, space aliens or something. It was really kind of dramatic. You think about somebody who grew up on a farm who never saw a car, and then you watch a movie like 1917, which I highly recommend, you know, and you see that kind of, you know, that kind of movement, that kind of construction and everything. I mean, it's really quite dramatic. And I think we're at least in an era like that where the world isn't going to look the same. I mean, it just doesn't look the same. Look at schooling right now. You mentioned kids. It's never going to go back to how it was. And it's only a matter of seeing how severe the shift is. It could be quite a bit more than what we think it is already.
I agree with that. And I mentioned earlier as well that we tend to operate on a bit of a sine wave. There's ups, there's downs. Sometimes they're more extreme than others. That's where we see situations of dark ages and golden ages, periods of great recession and periods of great advancement. And typically this is as a result of some major catalyst that really sparks this. And whether that be a world war that drives the advancement of technologies, as you know, the human welfare obviously is a huge motivation, the art of survival. Nobody wants to die. So in this situation, technological advancement occurred. As of now, we're really in what could be referred to as, in my opinion, as a technological J curve, where we're really accelerating at such an exponential rate. And there's arguments around this, and I think Elon Musk actually argues his stance on why we're in a simulation based on the rate of growth that we've experienced in the last 20 years, with respect to what we've done in billions of years. We've seen more in the last 20 years than we have in millions of years, essentially.
Right.
Now, with that specifically, there's, how severe would you say that the situation could be? You know, we oftentimes see that there can be great growth from these opportunities. It's almost as if it's the phoenix. The phoenix rises from the ashes, reborn in an even better body than it was previously. Do you feel that this is the type of situation that America and the world can really rise out of and be stronger? Or do you feel that this is a situation that could turn in either direction?
It could do both. I think it could get quite bad, and almost the worse it gets, the more dramatic the rebirth will be. I think we've had enough pain right now. Unfortunately, I think there's going to be more pain, but I definitely agree that there will be a rebirth from this. You know, you're going to have entire industries decimated. You know, the next one that's on the chopping block is colleges, universities. Education will be completely transformed, but the revenue model for the colleges is really going to get crushed because they got people coming in September who might not come back. Even 10% of them stay home because of either economics, fear, they'd prefer to go along, or they just look at it and say, hey, wait a minute, is it worth 40 grand to have some Zoom meetings with a couple adjunct professors who are making 40 grand? Why don't I just pay one of them and they teach my friends and I? Why don't you can do an Udemy course for $10. I subscribe to the master class, the full super bells and whistles VIP version. It's $180 a year. I got Martin Scorsese teaching me how to do screenwriting and Steve Martin teaching me how to do comedy. You can't beat that with even $100,000 education at your local university. You can supplement it, but that's exactly what people are going to do. I think you're going to have people have, some of these subscriptions that are in the thousands of dollars instead of the tens and thousands that can really pretty much duplicate it. And you're going to see that right now. Any of the companies who are working on that are going to skyrocket. So I think you're going to have very, very, very dramatic changes in all kinds of aspects of the world, particularly those things like education and airlines and cruises and things that get really smacked hard. I think that you'll see big shifts in how those things work. And things like what we're doing right now, online communication. Look how far this has come. I mean, I think everybody's done more Zoom meetings in the last month than ever. I didn't really use Zoom that much before. I do Zoom every 2 months or something, once a month maybe. Now everybody uses it every day. And I think I can't wait till they haven't gotten caught up on the hardware, but I can't wait till we can just spend like, $2 grand and get like a really nice, crisp flat panel with a really good camera built in. And once they do that, everybody's going to buy it. Every corporation's going to buy it, every podcaster, every professional, everybody like you and I who's using this stuff. And then we're going to have a much higher speed connection. We'll be looking at each other on bigger screens and clearer sound, and that'll be cool. So I think you're going to see some of those things take time, particularly things like that with hardware. You're looking at maybe a couple of years, but I don't know. Things are moving so fast. You don't know what's going to happen, but we do know it's going to be significant, and we do know it's going to change. And that was kind of the main purpose of that economic article, is just sort of talking about how it might look and why and what is so significant about it and what is an epoch shift and what does it mean and how does our frame of reference change, because we've never seen anything like this. It's a totally different world that we're in, and we really need to mentally prepare for the unknown.
Well, you definitely are right, in which there's one thing for sure is that the value of time, of what people are spending their time on right now, everything has become so much more accessible. Online education, the whole works. Our whole lives growing up, we were told and taught that college is the way to go. I went into college. I was there for about a year. I dropped out. I did not enjoy it. I personally don't like being put into a situation where I have to do a rigorous set of procedures for the period of 4 years, 5 years to get this degree that represents that I'm smart or capable or competent. Now, unfortunately, I did go back to college 4 years later and got my degree, as I found that, I can't necessarily dig my feet in that deep. I still have to have that proof and give people that trust that I am competent in some ways. But otherwise, with this education, what is that value is what this is going to come down to. Is it worth spending that much time? Is it worth paying that much money when realistically, as you mentioned, we can stay at home and do this? I would say that I've taken seminars that were over the course of 1 to 2 months that I probably learned more from, that was of more value than what I did in the 4-year period of college. So I think that we're, as a society, advancing beyond what is required of us. Are we required to go to college, or can we become just as well versed by doing our own online education now? We don't have to go to libraries. We have to do a Google search and everything is at our fingertips. Do we need to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to become a well-versed person in the society? With all of that said, I just want to say that I've really appreciated your time on this, Bruce. And what I'd love to hear is if you have one takeaway for our listeners today in terms of a motto or anything of that, what would you tell people?
Be patient, be prudent, and be selective in your investing. It's very it's very key to do those things, and avoid emotion, avoid fear and greed. Those are the two big emotions that wreck investing. And yeah, I mean, not much of a catchy slogan, but I think just sort of being able to be flexible and recognizing that the world is going to change. Skills that were useful are not going to be useful. You know, there's jobs that are just gone, and they're gone for good. And it's sad because there's people who were masters at their industry who are going to be at the bottom again. But some of them can use what they knew before to build something new. And everybody should be ready to be flexible and move and change in the world. And there's going to be a lot of fortunes made, and there's going to be a lot of successes that come out of this. And I think the way to have a better chance of doing that is to be flexible and open-minded, and not get stuck in the old worlds, and don't do things the way they used to, because that world is gone. You know, the models that worked were based on behaviors that have changed. Everybody has changed now, so the world is different. So I think that it just makes sense to be really flexible.
Great advice, Bruce. And I just want to thank you once again for taking part in this. Once again, everyone, this has been Bruce Fenton. This is the Ask America episode of the Binance podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.